This is the Jobs versus Infrastructure panel, and we're scheduled to be here from 1:30 to about a little bit before, probably 3 o'clock, 3:15. And so the description for this session is which should come first, jobs or infrastructure? And so it says we're pitting Derrick against Jessica, but we also have Christine here. But the idea is what is needed to create a thriving economy or thriving economies at the community level? You know, is it jobs? Is it infrastructure? And so Jessica and the team are thinking, well, you know, we got jobs on this category and infrastructure on this side. So if you're open to it, for those of you that think jobs is the way to go, sit on this side. For those of you that think infrastructure is the way to go on this side, no, you can't have anybody in the middle. So, if you're inclined to do jobs on this side and infrastructure on this side, so I guess what we're doing that to kind of get a poll for, you know, what you're thinking and what you think is the best approach for there you go, right in the middle. Yeah, I'm right. I'm there too. Yeah. You know, and today, so we're going to talk about jobs, infrastructure, education. So jobs on this side, is that right? Yeah, and then infrastructure on this side. So that's our kind of physical poll, if you will. But for those of you that know me, again, I'll introduce myself real quickly. I'm Derrick Watchman and owner of my company, Sagebrush Hill Group, LLC. I'm a member of the Net Chamber of Commerce. I do a bunch of other things, but my principal job is a consultant on many different fronts: banking, financing, economic development, energy, and so forth. But I've been a member of the Net Chamber for 3 years. I really believe that, and as you heard yesterday and today, one of the most lucrative and opportune components for our economy is how do we build a private sector. You know, and so I work a lot with the United States Small Business Administration, and so their motto and their words is that the jobs in America, if you will, over 60% are small, that might be even higher, small business related. Over 60% of the jobs in this country are from the small business sector. If you look at what we have here on Navajo, although it's hard to get data, and maybe you know, the Economic Development Department will work on that. But if you look at what's out here, you have, you know, IHS, BIA, the schools, the tribe, and the enterprises. Those are all primarily government. So when you look at how many jobs are from the private sector, you know, it's probably pales in comparison to what you see. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica to have her introduce herself real quickly, and then Christine, and then we'll get into get ready to rumble. So that's what we're trying to do today, right? So she's gonna get ready. No. Okay, Jessica, it's all you.
Thank you, Derrick. So you all know my name is Jessica Stago. I'm a co-founder of Change Jobs, and I also work with a nonprofit called Grand Canyon Trust, and in both places I work to support entrepreneurs in the space of economic development, community development, and with Grand Canyon Trust we also work a little bit. Our focus there is on creating local economies, so that are culturally relevant and in line with local values. So there's a lot there, but for this session, I was teasing Derrick that I was going to walk up here and take my earrings off. And then I brought my backup with me, so it was supposed to be just me and him, and I kind of brought some backup with me. So, but this discussion started with a discussion that Derrick and I were having when we were planning this conference with the Navajo Entrepreneurship Coalition, where we were saying that, Derrick was saying, you know, we really need to be recruiting companies or building companies that are going to create jobs on the reservation. Like that's the priority. And then I remembered back when we were getting Change Labs started, and when we were asking for grants and funds to start Change Labs, which is an entrepreneurial support organization. We were told, okay, we'll give you this grant, but you have to tell us how many jobs are you going to create in your community, and we're still told that all the time. So one of the things we did was we sort of rejected that as a metric, because if you're working with entrepreneurs, the entrepreneurs that we're working with, the ones that are in the community that we felt like really needed the services we wanted to provide, at where they were at startup is only one job, right? So if we're graduating even 20 entrepreneurs out of our incubator, that's 20 jobs. And so if you look at some of the projects that Derrick mentioned, they can easily say, well, if we open up a convenience store, well, maybe new convenience store. You know what, I should just let Derrick do his job. Anyway, so we sort of said, we don't think that creating jobs is a priority here. Creating the entrepreneurs that are then gonna grow their businesses should be the priority, but then what do you need there? You need infrastructure, you need other things besides just that. So it's a complicated discussion to have, and so that's why we said, you know what, this is, it's a good discussion to have in this forum. So, and then my backup here is going to talk about what she does as well. So I'll just pass it on to her.
I was going to be the referee, but I didn't have a striped shirt, so. I'm Christine Laughter. I am the director of the Kinship Lending Program at Change Labs, and I'm also board chair for Northland Pioneer College. We're the community college district in Navajo County, and also we do provide services or courses in the Apache County areas, because Apache County does not have its own community college. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how creating or providing the educational resources will help in both areas when we look at creating courses for those areas in infrastructure, and then also creating courses that'll help entrepreneurs get into the field of work that they want to be in. I thought, hey, this is a great place to talk about that, because we're a community college and we can be creative in what we can offer in our communities. We can be creative how we bring those courses to the communities. For those of you who aren't familiar with Navajo County, we have centers all the way from White Mountain, down in White River, all the way up to Kayenta. So we have a few campuses and centers throughout the county. So we want to be able to think about those places, like our hospitals, for example. Those aren't just health careers, but we also have administrative careers in those positions. And to build out the infrastructure in communities, we need people who have those skills to do the work to make that happen. So that's why I'm here to be part of this discussion.
You want to go first?
Okay, so is it jobs? Is it infrastructure? I'm going to talk a little bit about my perspective on jobs, and so, but I also equally think that infrastructure is good. So when you talk about economic development and we talk about community growth, one of the end products, a lot of folks is, economic development will create jobs, and so if you look at the number of jobs here on the reservation. I know we had a session earlier from our economists about economic data, and so the actual number of jobs here on the reservation, it's hard to qualify or quantify. But one of the crux of economic development is having a job and being able to support your family, yourself, and your expenses. And so, one of the things that has probably gotten away with jobs are, like, for example, government subsidies. I know in the past, the general distribution really provided a mechanism where, instead of working, you could get on general assistance. And those programs have kind of dwindled. We still need it, but when you look at economic development, one of the things that a lot of other localities talk about is that, our job is to create jobs. And so, but what does that mean? What does it mean to have jobs? If you look at what we have here on the reservation, I know a lot of folks have said, the Navajo labor force is highly skilled and highly educated. And so, but what does that mean? That lends itself to, what does it mean to be educated? In the last couple months, or in the last year, there's been a lot of discussion, and I don't want to take Christine's thunder, but a lot of discussion on, what does it mean to be educated? Does it mean to have all the degrees? Or does it mean to have the skill set necessary to do the jobs? So if you look at the discussion nationally, a lot of folks are saying, you know what? Maybe the reason why we have a lot of vacant jobs is because we're asking too much for the degrees. That piece of paper, which basically demonstrates that you've gone either, 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, or, whatever it takes to get a PhD. Rather than having that piece of paper where you've gone to an institution, what about the skill set? How to do 10 key, how to run a computer, or how to code, and all those other things. And so you definitely need the jobs and the labor force to grow your economy. And so the question I think for us, here on Navajo, and that is that if we want to grow our economies, what do we have at our disposal? Meaning, there's what, 100 and I forget what the stats are. There's roughly 200,000 of us that live on this reservation. So what is our skill set? How many have degrees? What kind of degrees? How many have skill sets? How many are welders or contractors or laborers? So what that, and then there's another segment that sometimes, actually we rarely talk about, is that, how many farmers and ranchers and folks that are skilled on the agriculture side. How many of us, run cattle, so we run it as a business, or how many run sheep, or, the byproducts of a sheep, if you will, the wool, what do we have? And so when you start talking about economic development and job creation, I think one of the things that we don't have is just basic data, that tells us what we have available. From there, you can use your jobs, the job count, to say, okay, what do we need? If we have a lot of folks that are equipped and know how to build, and our construction folks, maybe we start looking at those businesses that are construction related. If we have folks with certain degrees, maybe we look at those fields. And so I know if you look at rural America, I think Jessica kind of touched upon this a little bit. The easy fix for rural America, and we see that on reservations for economic development, is a gas station convenience store. And so those are real quick and easy ways to create some economic development, but it's very, very little. And so in many cases, a gas station convenience store really is a way for someone to, on their way out of reservation, to gas up, get some pop and potato chips and, head to town. And so, so we had to figure out how to address that. So that's kind of my first take on jobs, and I'll turn it over to Jessica to hear about her take on infrastructure.
So I think if you think through our rural communities, right, and normally the go-to project for many of our communities is a convenience store. And then now now that people are realizing how much money is in like the tourism industry, now you're starting to see like hotels. Well, Shanto has a new hotel going up. Shiprock has been trying to build a hotel for some years now. There's some communities that have been trying to, build hotels. And so those strategies are more about, and that's what's called economic development in our communities, right? Convenience store. You hear, well, from the council's perspective, you hear them talking about economic development, then they're talking about the oil and gas industry or convenience stores or hotels or casino gaming. That's what they've been focused on. And the justification for that has always been jobs. It's going to create a certain number of jobs. And it's valid because, as I said, when we were looking for funds from the USDA or the SBA or the Department of Commerce to provide support for entrepreneurs, that was their question. So even off the reservation, that metric of economic development is based on job creation. But what do you think is the main reason why, even if we continue to create jobs or save jobs in our communities through the industries that exist, or even through tourism, what happens? If you have a job on the reservation, what do you do when you get paid? You go off the reservation to spend your money. And so we don't have what I like to call a baseline economy within our communities that provides products and services in our communities that we would spend the money on. And there is a social sort of a social behavior, I guess, that we all have, that people like to go to town, right? And that's been generations now. That's the thing to do, is get dressed up. Like my grandma used to get all her jewelry out so we could go to town. And that, now that I think back, that was her entertainment, and to get out of the house was to go to town and shop. So that's ingrained in us, that's what you do. And so people complain about that. They say, well, even if you did build a theater, theaters built on the reservation haven't lasted very long because people want to come to Harkins instead. So they begin to look past, businesses on the reservation tend to not put as much investment into being of service to the community or providing the amenities that businesses off the reservation have. And I think we fail to realize that we are also consumers. We want to go into a store and we want to have a nice display, and that matters in how we spend our money. So that for us at Change Labs is how we think about building businesses, teaching business owners that you have to invest in this. You have to care about your packaging. You have to tell your story with your products and services. And so to me, that kind of infrastructure is what's needed within our entrepreneurial, and we have a very large entrepreneurial community. I think Derrick mentioned that there are a lot of people out there that provide products and services. And so that's kind of the type of infrastructure that we do at Change Labs. And that's not even, of course, then you start to think about some of the other types of infrastructure. But I'll stop there and pass the mic to Christine.
Well, I want to talk about education and some of the possibilities at our colleges and even universities in the area, what they can do when we're looking at bringing more jobs and infrastructure to the Navajo Nation. We think about there's a course that Google was offering. It was a $50 course to learn about coding. And it was like a 6-week course, and if you got that certificate, you were able to go and do coding. And what a way to be able to make money from home and not have to leave your home, right? And then you take that and you spend money in your community. But not many people have the opportunity to have access to internet to do that, right? So what do we do in the community colleges? We can create courses that are specific to the communities we're in. I was just talking to the president of our college, and the discussion was about what we're doing here at Change Labs. We have a lot of entrepreneurs that don't know how to do bookkeeping. Sure, they're experts in the field of work that they do. They're expert jewelers. They know how to run a farrier service. They know how to do other businesses, but they don't know the basic bookkeeping. They don't know what they need to do to keep track of expenses and revenue and all of that. So what we do is, I talked to the president, I said, what can we do? He says, we can customize a course for you guys. We can customize a course so that your members and the people at Change Labs can actually go through this course and do basic bookkeeping for their business. So the college is really creative in that way. So what I would like to see is other colleges, do things like that for their communities, because not everybody has 2 years to go after a degree. Maybe they have 6 months to work on a certificate that can help them with basic, maybe, I'm not sure what the plumbing industry is, and I've heard about plumbing. I mean, that's a really highly skilled trade, right? So if people were to go in and learn that skill, then they could go back into their communities and do work to help build the infrastructure in their communities. So there is a lot of possibility. Colleges and universities have to start looking at different ways that they can help communities to get to that level.
So are we answering jobs versus infrastructure? Because it seems to me that when I think of infrastructure, I think of broadband, I think of the roads, I think about the utility lines, I think about the basic things that is needed to make a building. Is that infrastructure, or are we also saying education?
Well, first, I think we should ask.
Okay.
So, some of you came into the room later. We have this line down the middle. Right. And we have, what do we say, infrastructure on this side, jobs on this side. But since everybody looks comfortable in their seats, it doesn't look like anybody wants to get up. Let's just have a show of hands. How many of you think that communities should focus on providing jobs in their communities? How many of you think that communities should focus on providing jobs in their communities today?
There's a few. Hold on.
Okay. So how many of you think that the focus should actually be infrastructure?
Yeah.
So he split that right down the middle.
Yeah. Well, I guess
what he said, let me just repeat.
Yeah, go ahead.
So people, what he said was that infrastructure is important, but for that in the short term, you have to provide temporary employment, temporary jobs to build the infrastructure that would then create permanent employment.
Well, I was going to say, what I'm hearing is that when you do the infrastructure, you create jobs, temporarily. So it's kind of one and the same. But we had a hand up over here. Who had your? Okay, all right. So, Brett, go ahead.
And the way I've always kind of viewed priority in spending, it's just like your own individual existence. What do you do when you turn 18 and you get your first push out the door? Do you go buy a house? Do you go start cementing in some long-term future? Usually you have to build up and scale up your own expertise and capacity, and that's where jobs, you get jobs. You do these very short-term, but very intentionally, they're temporary, but they're scaling and building from a very like fundamental position up. Then you can afford the house, well, at least the house you want, that you can then build up the resources for. I'm always been critical of like planning in a lot of our communities, because all these land use plans, all these different feasibilities never include revenue generation. How are we going to afford to pay for this? So I believe that that's a product of getting a job, a product of getting an income, is the first step in trying to resource yourself before making those attempts and bringing in strategies like debt and all these other things down the road. So that's my comment on it.
I agree. One of the things that I see out there is we're talking with the ARPA money. There's a lot of money that's going to go out for infrastructure. The challenge is going to be, you know, everyone's get a water line, but guess what? NTOA will come back and send you a bill. It's not going to be free. Yeah, they paid for the pipeline installation, but now we all have to pay for the O&M, you know, to monitor the spigot. So I agree with you, but go ahead.
I disagree with it, because
Good.
you're not creating a job for the community. Normally, the people that will build the infrastructure are contractors that are coming in from the outside. So it's until you create infrastructure, then the job comes for the people that live there.
Well, I'm going to go off of, that's a good comment. I think in some countries, if you go there, and I think we had the comparison of China. If you go there, you have to use Chinese labor, Chinese money, everything. We don't do a good job here. You know, we let the contractors come in, and maybe we don't do a good job and say, you know, you have to use Navajo labor. Maybe that's the missing element. So, but that's a really good comment. So, Jessica, any thoughts?
I think what's interesting is we all see the connection between jobs and infrastructure, and the discussion about what comes first, and you know, what leads to what, or what opens up the doors for additional opportunity. But I think one of the things that I think is really interesting about this, that if we all feel like infrastructure is important, then why is it that every metric that we go by is jobs? So how do we change that dynamic, that, you know, when we're trying to build and you need money to build, they want to be, you know, they want to know how many jobs it's going to be, but then the other metric is short-term jobs, you know. So I think we have to think through the metrics that we sort of abide by, and rethink how we change that. Christine, you have anything to add?
Well, I agree. If you look at, for example, now I'll just throw this out. If you look at what the Biden-Harris administration are saying, if you look at all their plans, guess what their conclusion is? These programs, these efforts create jobs. I don't know if you listen to them. At the tail end is, we're doing this to create jobs. So I say, God, that's interesting. And I was thinking, but what does that mean? For me, nationally, when President Biden says, I want to create jobs, to me, if someone goes to work, then all of a sudden they have to pay taxes. And so that's a revenue source for the U.S. government. And so, but for us here, if we create a job, guess what? We don't have an income tax program. And so we miss out on that big plan from the White House. Create job, income tax, we have a taxpayer. We don't have that necessarily here on the reservation, because, you know, we don't have if you're off reservation, you have to pay an Arizona income tax. So we don't have an income tax here. So I think we missed the mark there, but jobs are necessary. But we can't have jobs unless we have decent infrastructure. But I'm going to throw something out there. The other thing is that, you know, this whole thing of the younger generation, the millennials, and so, you know, people are trying to say, you know, what are these young guys, or young gals, what do they want to do? They want to work from home, or they want to work on the road, and, you know, like I do. You know, I'm not a Gen Z, but, you know, I don't need an office. So if you don't need an office, do you need the infrastructure? Maybe broadband. I don't know.
Broadband is infrastructure.
Yeah. Okay. So
and
go ahead.
everybody needs the broadband. Yeah. And we also, though, if we create jobs, we're contributing to the tax base for communities outside of our
Well-
communities, because we don't have the infrastructure for small businesses to start in our communities. So that's been the story. We all see that. So how do we have to have that economic or the entrepreneurial base there, or that doesn't change.
Right. There's a question over here. You had your hand up?
Oh yeah, I just
Okay, go ahead,
I just want to take it back a little bit
please.
in regards to infrastructure. So what is infrastructure? So I'm gonna concentrate on water. Water is a basic infrastructure that we all need, beginning from in the morning, from all the grandmas and the ladies, the women folk that make burritos in the morning. They need water to make the dough, right? So we starting from there and looking at our nation, where we're at, infrastructure. Do we have a water system? Do we have a water infrastructure, zoning? For example, when you go and fly in the air and you look down at, we're using at all these examples of cities, what do you see? Just like this carpet, you see a main water line, you see electrical. What is that? That's infrastructure, that's zoning, that's planning. And with that planning, you're creating things that's what we need here. Starting from at home, and then all the way to the level that we're at with all the technology. Talking about technology, infrastructure. What do we have? Cell one. When we go to town, oh, my phone goes to 3G. We drop our phone. We don't have 5G. I was over in Mongolia this fall, and I was surprised because way out there in the middle of nowhere, they have 5G, and they have infrastructure. And so thinking about that education, there again, how are we teaching so a lot of us, and some of us, I didn't go to school, and get the knowledge to go and then come back to bring that. At least that's what we were told, to go and get educated and then come back and make that comparison, just like what you're doing. So 2 ways of life, that's how we live. Auntie, some of us still have livestock and at home, and then some of us, we have the up-to-date laptops and whatnot to communicate. But anyway, going back to the education, I like that. And then we have lawyers, and why don't we, part of the infrastructure could be, why don't we at the college create a law program on studying policy and federal law and, all these things there. So anyway, I just wanted to, infrastructure, for sure we need that, because it's not here, and we're always trying to figure out a way to create all these things at the chapter level, and then it goes on up, and then there's no plan. So with this infrastructure and with what Change Labs is doing, I believe that it's really good and effective. And so, yeah, so you create the infrastructure, then the jobs come. If you have the jobs and you're trying to create an infrastructure that you don't know nothing about, that doesn't work, then they just go and leave. But the infrastructure creates something that's concrete, people that are going to work there and stay there. That's just my opinion anyway. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Olivia Jones, Kansas Township. I agree that the infrastructure, plays a vital role in that, because we're kind of dealing with that right now. We have a lot of small businesses that want office space. They want to come and open up their business in the area, but we don't have anywhere to put them. But then on the other hand, you create jobs, but it's not competitive. The salary and the wages that we pay are not competitive with what's out there in the market. So it really makes it hard to actually have that retention. We don't really, we're not as competitive, outside and off the res. People say, oh, well, I make more money if I live off the res. And that's what they do, but they don't really factor in, how much they're going to spend on the rent or, the cost of living versus, being on the reservation. So I think they're kind of married, but at the same time, I think there's that other aspect of creating jobs that are more competitive with the industry outside and off the res.
Both of those are really good points. I think it's clear that infrastructure provides long-term stability, but jobs can create that initial maybe start to pay for that long-term infrastructure and to pay for that economic activity. So it's a cycle that I think it depends on one another. So when you said they're married, I thought they're married, but they fight a lot.
Well, I guess what I'm hearing is that infrastructure, in all situations is good to start first, and then that creates the jobs. And so the challenge that we have here on Navajo is just how do we get the infrastructure? Right now, because of the CARES Act and ARPA, the American Rescue Plan, there's billions of dollars that are available, but it's slow, it's not happening, and so, I guess, how do we make it happen? So from the local level, what's going on? Did we, I'll put it out there, did we not elect the right leaders, Or maybe is it the leadership? Is it us? Is it the community level? Is it my grandma because she doesn't want to sign off on her grazing permit? Well, I'll put it out there. Some of our grandmas just don't want to do it because, it's just something that this has been my land. I'm saving it for you, and so is that getting in the way? Or is it we don't have the jobs? The skilled labor. I'm trying to understand in my own mind, why is it taking so long, to get the infrastructure out there? And so, but I agree, actually you probably need both. But in order to get a solid economy going, you have to have the infrastructure. I know that as an example, when I built this place here, when I built the Twin Arrows Casino, I didn't have power, I didn't have water, I didn't have telecom. So guess what I had to do? I drilled 3 wells over here because I wasn't in close proximity to anything. Telecom, I went over here to Verizon. Verizon wanted a $5 million hookup fee. I said, it's just right here. They said, well, but you're on reservation, and plus you have to go through the Arizona Corporation Commission. So I said, okay, so I talked to NTOA. So if you look over here at this tower, there's a big microwave. This site here is actually the telecommunications is through microwave. It's shot all the way to Shiprock, so we got that done. We also had to invest some more money so that we can tap into the Arizona Public Service System so we can get electricity. But that added probably 30%. So this is a $100 million project, but I had to spend $30 million just to get the infrastructure so we can build this. Now, if you go off reservation, in many cases, you have taxes, you have maybe the utilities, they all help, and they help build that so that if you have a business, you don't have the extra costs. So infrastructure, I guess, what I'm trying to say, is costly these days. And so, that's another factor that I want to throw into the picture. So, anybody have more questions? Way back there, okay.
A road is at least $2 million a mile. A water line is probably $300,000 a mile. Electricity, probably $500,000 a mile. That's why NHA wants everybody to live in clusters, right? It's cheaper. Off reservation, it's generally local governments who put in the infrastructure. They sell bonds. A bond is an IOU. That's all it is. So they sell all these bonds, they raise money, and then they put in the infrastructure. But that sets the stage for mom and pop to build their building, to start their business. And then, of course, you have all the taxation mechanisms. They collect the taxes to help pay for all the infrastructure that was built with IOUs. But anyway, that's kind of the approach off reservation.
That's true. And so I know, the last couple of days, we were talking about different models, and I think Mr. Austin here said, what about doing it our own way? And so I think maybe that's a discussion, and we can try to explore that. What does that mean, our own way of building infrastructure, creating the jobs? I don't really have an answer for that right now. I know that, in the day, a lot of us, I'm reminded of, my Che. He used to say, yeah, a long time ago, we used to go to the Navajo ceremonial. We get ready for that. Put everybody in the wagon, and then, go, because we're from the Navajo area, Navajo, New Mexico. So he said we'd make this long couple-day trek over to Gallup ceremonial. But they did that because I think, they made, my great-grandma made rugs, and they had other things. So that was their commercial activity. So they obviously went and then participated in the ceremonial, but they made some money, and then they came home. And so, but that was their day, and the infrastructure was terrible then. Basically a dirt road and nothing there, but they survived. They basically felt that they had a wholesome, complete home, and that was the day. Now today, I can't live with, I got 2 phones, that's how I do my work now. And so, but I have 2 phones because one of them, the service is terrible on Navajo. So I have to, I think the cell 1 example. And so clearly we have a deficit in our infrastructure. And so how do we work together, to make that happen? And that's probably one of the big reasons for the coalition is how do we collaborate and try to make things, happen. And so, but infrastructure again is needed. We have some resources, so we have to figure out, how to make it happen. So I'm not sure where I'm going with this, Jessica, but I'll throw it to you. Maybe you have some things. So, it said jobs versus infrastructure, and it says Derrick Watchman is going to be, what did it say, pitting Derrick Watchman against Jessica Stago. So I'm trying to make this, how do we get to that point so people can say, God, they were at it. Go ahead, Jessica. Something to think about.
I'm actually going to ask Christine to step in here.
Well, I'm talking about education, and so one of the things I'm going to share the story about driving through Dennehotso. So my dad is from Monument Valley, Oljeto area, then my mom is from Dennehotso. And so one time I was, out there driving with my parents through Dennehotso, where there used to be many, many farms. I mean, that whole area was farmland at one time. They used to take water from Laguna Creek to water their farms there. I remember, they have these big cottonwood trees, and all through there was farms, cornfields, and all the different vegetables that they used to grow out there. And then my dad says, you know what happened? He said the government came in. The government came in and started providing commodity foods. Just like Derrick said, those general services, those services to people, so they didn't have to do the farming anymore. So what happened, they put their farming tools away and they just depended on the government. Then they didn't have to work. The reason to work was now gone. The reason to raise a farm was now gone. So I think about that, and we need to, really start to bring even those simple things back so that people can get back to that basic of working. I think that some of the families out there have not been taught about hard work ethic. I don't even know if that's the right word, but I think about, with me and where I come from, my father, he was just a hard ass. I mean, he did not let us get away with anything when we were growing up. He made sure that, what we did was we worked hard and we were honest about the work that we did. And I think that when people learn that, right, as they're growing up, that's really important, and then they can take that into the workforce. If they, decide to go on to school, and if they decide to further their education, that's such a big part of that part of their life. But I really think that part of doing things in life is important. So, just having that part of the work ethic, I think, is something that people really need when we talk about jobs and we talk about that part of growing a really robust community of jobs. So that's one thing that I want to add just from my own experience.
So I think talking about farming is and agriculture is a good example, and I think that we have to think about that. Where we are now and the discussion that we're having is because we're at a point in our, almost in history, that we have to make decisions about, the generations coming after us. And I think that we should think about what Mr. Austin's presentation was. If you look at all of the federal Indian policy laws, they all mention something about, Native people or Indigenous people being savages. And so every law was meant to take the savage out of us. And back then, farming, it's not even that far back, right? It's 1970s, 60s, that those farms went away. And I think that from my studies and what I experience and I work with a local farmers cooperative around the LCR. A lot of the farms there's ancestral farms, they're, farms that the people that live there grew their food from when they were kids. And now they're going back to sort of try to revitalize those farms and those plots. But many of them know that they have been told that you cannot farm. By law, this land is no longer agricultural land, and so there was a shift because the federal government did not want us to be self-sufficient. And there was alternative motives for that, which we can get into in another session. But they wanted us to move our economy to what we call a cash economy, where we work a job, we get paid for that job, the money we get paid, we go to the store and we buy food. But what the failure is that there's never been enough employment to give us enough money. And then we literally can't grow our own food, so there's not also enough food. And so that's where we are. That's how we got to, it's very simplified. There's of course some complexity there, but to where we are now. So how do we, we're at a place in time where we have to be able to figure out how we're going to generate that employment using our own skills and creativity and our own entrepreneurial mindset. And I think we all have it. I don't think there's many entrepreneurs in our communities. We have to put those kind of people to work for ourselves and for our families and for our communities and build that base economy that then when there are jobs, when we can put up, a business comes into our community that can provide 50 jobs, that payroll can go to support those small businesses. And then those small businesses can grow and they can also start creating jobs. But we also, infrastructure is expensive. $2 million for 1 mile of road. I mean, that's crazy, right? When you think about it, though, that's what entrepreneurs are faced with as well. A lot of entrepreneurs I have seen have tried to figure out or have figured out how to put their own infrastructure in to wherever they want to do business. I've seen, a tire shop in Ganado who put in his own electrical line, even built his own little road to pull off the road to his business because ADOT said you can't open your business until it's safe to pull off the road. So he, made his own little exit. And he had to pay for that. So how do we have to reduce costs of infrastructure for entrepreneurs so you can have more entrepreneurs who will create more jobs that will also pay for the cost of infrastructure over the long term. So I don't know if that's complex. for this.
Well, I think you're right on. So, jobs versus infrastructure. I think they go hand in hand. So, but at this point, I'm curious. Does anybody have any other thoughts on this important topic? Joseph.
Did we change anybody's mind?
Does anyone want to move this side to this side?
Joseph, and then Candace.
A couple of things here that when you were all talking and I was thinking about this. First of all, I'm up front, so I got to turn around. Anybody here from the millennial generation? Gen Z? Couple of us.
Gen Z, that's half of us now.
So, power to millennials and Gen Z. We're the future, right? We
That's
had
right.
our elders told us to go off the reservation and get educated and come back, and then we get yelled at when we try to come back, right? And we're too young to know any better, right? That's what we're told all the time. And when we're talking about infrastructure and jobs, what I'm thinking about is, first of all, I think infrastructure can be an incentive for our generation to come back. I'll be honest, I need my 5G, I need my internet. I can work for Navajo government if I wanted. I don't want to, but the pay is there. But if there's no infrastructure, I'm leaving a comfortable life in my main residence in Tucson to come out here and rough it. And my wife would probably not like that either because there's no infrastructure, right? We can probably hack it for maybe 2 weeks and then we got to go back. That's number one. So I think it can be an incentive for the infrastructure to be there. Number two, when we think about the Navajo communities, agriculture and farming and ranching is still a big part of our way of life. And a lot of that, when you think about it, really doesn't require some of the infrastructure that you would think, right? I mean, usually when people think jobs and infrastructure, they think office buildings and stuff like that, but you can ranch just based off of the land, and a lot of our families do that, including my uncles who, they spent many years operating and owning a ranch. And so you wouldn't need really big office buildings or anything like that, maybe equipment. And you can generate jobs like that because you can be a ranch hand, I guess. The other thing too is we have a lot of flea markets where people don't have their usual infrastructure as shops and all that. They just show up, like in our hometown of Kayenta, y'all have been to the flea markets. You roll up there and you just pull up your truck and set out your table and you're in business. And so that doesn't require the infrastructure. But again, you can employ people. Mostly it's going to be your grandma's telling you what to do, set out the jewelry and all that kind of stuff, right? And really that's the informal economy is what I'm talking about. That you generate income, money from that. You might not be registered as a business, but what you're doing is you're doing business. The other thing is e-commerce, right? Is e-commerce, you can have your digital storefront on Amazon or Etsy, stuff like that. It doesn't require infrastructure unless we're talking about telecommunications and you're living on the reservation. In order to engage in e-commerce, you would need that internet connection or something like that, maybe 5G. But also, again, times are changing where the old brick and mortar infrastructures, when we think about office space and retail space, that's not needed anymore, right? And that's why you see a lot of shopping malls that are closing down. Plazas are going empty. My law office, for me, I run a business too. I run my law office, and I'm constantly thinking of ways not to do the usual brick and mortar office. I'm thinking of ways that can I do something to reduce those overhead costs and work from home. My office is my laptop, and I'm very well able to operate a law office and have associates where our office is our laptop, and you don't need the infrastructure. So I think that kind of, when you're talking about jobs versus infrastructure, which one's more important? I think they do go hand in hand, but at the same time, you can have jobs, I think, without having the traditional infrastructure. And infrastructure can serve as an incentive for folks like me to come back and, give jobs on the reservation. But I can employ people from Navajo Nation if I wanted to through my law office, and not need infrastructure, stuff like that. I can do that from Tucson. So just some comments out there to what I wanted to add.
Yate, My name's Candace Mendez, and I don't have anything to complain about anymore because I got my Starlink this year. So last year I would have been a hot mess and complaining and crying about everything, but this year I'm going to complain about not having water infrastructure, not having dams, not having running water. And I am one part of the young people that moved back to Navajo. I'm from Sabadelkai, and we have a working ranch there. We're in the middle of lambing and calving, but we're just not going to be able to grow if we don't have any water for the animals. And right now I don't have enough product for the demand because I don't have enough water for the product to live off of, right? So that's my big thing. And people, I'm working with USDA, I'm working with a lot of government help because Navajo producers just don't get the support like the producers out in North Dakota and South Dakota and Nebraska. And they're out producing us because they get basically all this money from the federal government. And they get all this. And so it's just, I was like, what's going on? Why we have the best animals? I've seen all the animals. I go to all these livestock shows and I see them, and our Navajo animals are way high. They're really, really, really good looking animals. And, oh my God, I'm gonna get emotional, you guys. Remember we said this yesterday? I was crying like every 5 minutes. Because I'm so proud of my animals. I'm proud of my Navajo people. We do really, really well with no water. What? And we're out producing everybody, all the ranches around here, by far. And we do it with no infrastructure. And, I travel a lot. And, this guy made the comment about, well, Mongolia is able to do it. Why can't we? How come Mexico has all this stuff and we don't? And they're poorer than the United States. Why? And they talk to me about it. They're like, hey, aren't Indians over there get lots of money? And how come you guys don't have this? And why do your reservations look like this? And my answer for that is, we are under the thumb of the most powerful nation in the world. There's no way they're gonna, In Mexico, they have their own country, so they can make their own rules, they can put up their own towers. There's no, issues with having to deal with Verizon and going to the FCC and then telling them there's no right-of-way, no historical stuff, none of that. They just put it up and then they're ready to go. They also, like in China, and I was just in Abu Dhabi over the winter, and that was a really fascinating place to be at because their 7 tribes, all united, kicked out the British after they had oil. The British were like, oh, let me help you guys sell your oil. They're like, nope, please leave. And that was a powerful nation at the time. In the 1970s, they were very powerful. The British still are very powerful. England is. And it's just like Navajos could do that too. We're big enough. We're arrogant enough, from what I've been told. We've been doing this with no money and no infrastructure. And we're doing really, really well. And people are threatened by our product. They come and see my sheep and they're like, how did you get that? My grandma. We work long hours. So I think this infrastructure question is, I don't know, what do we need to build now? I don't have an office anymore. I was renting from Delcon chapter, but now I'm, my home office now. I get water from Delcon chapter. They deliver water to my cistern, and I get electricity from NTUA. And, and then I get all my food locally. I buy from local farmers. I butcher and I put my animals in the freezer. And and COVID was not a problem for me because I had all my supplies. Just like the grandma said, you can do it yourself. You can live off what you have off the land. And that's, I tell people, I'm living proof of that. You guys can move back. So, Austin, we need more mills on Navajo. I'm the only person under 50, like the next 200-mile radius. So, I need company. I don't have anybody to talk to out there except for my dogs. But yeah, if we had infrastructure, I think they would move back. But, you know, like, not everybody is built the way I am and the way I was raised. So, you know, if we had running water and we had, you know, everybody said that Starlink is too expensive, you know, but I didn't think it was, I thought it was really affordable compared to HughesNet and all that stuff. So those are my comments on infrastructure. And it's really hard. We can't get a dam built. Why? We have to work with Navajo County. Navajo County doesn't want to work with us. And then water department at Navajo doesn't want to work with us either. And then I've been told by the chapters and advised not to ask for money for dams because it never gets passed. So, and again, I will complain about something, is that the ag people on Navajo don't get enough attention. And that's, we don't have time to attend all the meetings, you know, especially if we're in the middle of lambing. I'm running on 4 hours of sleep, and you don't want me going to a meeting on 4 hours of sleep. I will start a fight. So all diplomacy's out the window. So that's kind of, you know, what I'm saying is, like, there's just, we have all this infrastructure. Do we even need it anymore, aside from dams and water? But that's the big issue. I think in Arizona it's just water. Anyway, thank you.
I do want to share a story real quick about one of our Change Labs members who has a farm. She has a farm, and she was able to take a loan from Change Labs to build caterpillar tunnels so that she could have a year-round growing season. And then what she did was she worked with a couple of other business entrepreneurs actually out there. One was a lady who has a market up in Rocky Ridge Marketplace, sold her produce to Rocky Ridge so that she could sell it to her customers. And then she also sold her produce to a chef, Chef Carlos, who would make these bento boxes. He would do sushi and some other things with these greens from her farm. That is what we use as an example of the people who've come through Change Labs, and we talk about that as being what a Navajo economy is and what we want to see as a Navajo economy, and creating jobs within our own communities. That farmer didn't have water. Same thing like Candace has to haul in water for her farms. They just recently got money to drill a well so they could have water at their farm. And that's what our business owners are having to do, is they're having to be resourceful like that so that they can grow their businesses and grow their what they're doing. And this is up in the Tisto area, so you probably know who I'm talking about. But just wanted to share that example.
Couple of things, I'll be quick. You know, if I'm selling jewelry and this table is full with all the stuff I made, and I come to a conference at Twin Arrows and I sell everything out, people are gonna think I'm killing it, I'm raking it in, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm just getting rich, I'm making money hand over fist. Well, if I sell all the jewelry on my table, I had a good day, I had a good week, I had a good month. I gotta get back to the shop and make more stuff and get ready for the next event to go sell my jewelry. You know, entrepreneurs are constantly hustling, constantly looking for the next gig, next contract. They're nice to everybody. They've got their elevator pitch ready to go at all times because they have to, because they're hustling for themselves, and that's a good thing. So that's the first thing I want to talk about, mention. The other thing is, you know, I think on maybe every reservation across this country, less than half or around half live on the reservation. And I think one day in the future, these politicians in DC are going to say, you Indians aren't living on your land. Why do you need all that land? And they might want to take it away from us. And so it's incumbent upon us, or the leaders, to change the conditions, make it more, improve the quality of life, right? Schools, roads, infrastructure, access to medical care, safe neighborhoods, all those things. That's really hard to do. But that's what we should keep in the back of our minds. You know, Navajo Nation, 17 million acres. That's a lot of land. They might say that to us. You're not using it.
Anybody else with a question, thought, or comment?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm hearing is, you know, what Candace is saying. She, you know, for the most part, she has everything that she needs with the exception of water. So I know in a couple presentations that I've done, I think we'll give it to you next, Brett. The thought that came to my mind is, what development do we want? Do we really want development? And it gets back to, my grandma and her thought that we don't need to sign off on the grazing permit because we're fine. You should be fine. I've taught you everything. Your Che and I have, put everything on the table, so live it. And so are we getting caught up in, what we see on TV, and are we getting caught up in that? So the question is, what is development? And I think Jessica also had the comment, every weekend, we relish it. I remember all the times going to Gallup, going to town. And I think all of us do. It's either the Page, it's either the Flag, it's Gallup or Farmington. And then those special times, it's Phoenix or Albuquerque because, got to get, maybe school closed or something. And so those are great times, and I'll remember that. And so is that what we are, and is that what we want? And so the big question that has come to my mind is what development do we really, really want? Do we want to see the hustle and bustle of what we see in Flagstaff or Phoenix? You go to Phoenix or Albuquerque, every year you go, there's just more and more there. And that growth obviously is positive and negative. It's negative because it's using the water that we talked about here. So I think that the question that, perhaps if you look at, what our Che's and our Sonnies are saying is that, do we really want this? Is this really what we want to be? And so that's a good question that I've been asked all the time. But let's go to Brett and hear from you what your thoughts are.
I mean, it's a really good conversation, and I applaud Candace's comments because I kind of come from a similar story. I've built multiple companies out of my family's ranch, and each, I'd have to haul water in between building solar units. I'd have to, drive, to Flagstaff to take a Zoom call because I didn't want to drop, in the middle of it. I did an accelerator, I was fortunate enough to be added into a bunch of CEOs and go through a program. All these other CEOs are sitting in offices and their houses, and here I am in the back seat of my truck, trying to use the booster so I wouldn't lose the call. We make these sacrifices, but I think it's also because we're trying to prove a point that you don't need to go somewhere to develop for things back here. That's always been my kind of position. But it also means we need to attract additional resources. There's really no, if I wanted to start a business out here, I can't call a few friends and say, hey, you got money? I have an idea. That's still kind of lacking. We don't have the generational wealth infrastructure that's kind of required to sustain an ecosystem. When people do this in San Francisco, they call their 5 richest buddies, and in a month they have, proposals on their desk and they're off and running. I had to make 2 calls a day, for about 3 years raising capital. And it was hard. We went through hundreds and hundreds of diligence calls. We did what we needed to do and we proved it, but it all that money came from somewhere else. There was a little bit from the Navajo Nation CDFI, which I'm very thankful for. But we had to convince them, by other diligence that was possible. So this thing about infrastructure, I always go back to resources. You have to think about what sustains you, and do you have access, clear and, controllable access to it, whether that's financing, whether that's products, supply chain. All of our industries are on a really fragile plane right now with their dependence on foreign-made product. This room, I bet you, has more imported things than the natives in here, It's like we brought everything in here, our clothes, our entire existence is built on importing. We haven't figured out how to localize our economies. And even for me, I develop projects, I have to import all the things I have to do to then sell it back out again, in the form of producing energy. Finding ways to bring that closer, is an infrastructure challenge because you're looking at that. But at the very, very base level of it, it's like chicken and egg. do you have the workforce to sustain this? Do you have the traffic count? Do you have just the basic data? Like, I think we're stuck in a really interesting situation because we have a lot of versions of success. They look really nice. They sound, I'll even throw myself into that. Like, I've been able to navigate into certain channels, but I'm still doing it with like my legs tied together and my arm behind my back. Like, there's still a disadvantage here. And it's even harder when you get into, you start to realize what other resources have and what their other communities have done. You know, I'm on this incubator with these entrepreneurs, and there's this fellow CEO. She's a CEO of a large battery storage company that Google created. Google made this company and put her in there. And she's Indian. Her family's from India. And so she brings her parents into the US every so often to help her watch her kids. But they have this group of women that support her so she can be a CEO. She can be the business person. They do the, daycare, they make food for the family, they take them to, it's interesting how this ecosystem of support has kind of risen up to support an entrepreneur. Because it's beyond just getting business support, it's also your daily life. We still have an existence outside of this. Does that infrastructure exist for us? Because a lot of people struggle with school because they have to worry about childcare, they have to worry about these other things, they worry about advancing opportunities. And I think those are all infrastructure issues that we have access challenges with. But I do worry about, like, are we focusing on like the luxuries of them? Like, in terms of like the question about, will we ever get, some of these things that we see and we like in Flagstaff? Or do we just buy Flagstaff? Like, that's like, my thought of it is like, I don't want that in, my community, because I like the way we live out there, but I would like access to it. So it's like, how do we amass the resources? Say, okay, well, we're gonna take that then, That's the way I think about it.
I think that's a really funny idea, because we were talking about the SSBCI program and how the access to capital issues and being able to not being able to give loans because people on the res don't have collateral, and we don't have, if we need $100,000, you generally have to come up with $20,000, and nobody has $20,000 laying around. And I think Derrick can probably attest to the banking deals that I've seen done on the reservation usually is because the owner of the company or the founder has a home off the reservation. This is pre-2008, before the housing market crashed. And so we were saying, why don't we just buy a piece of land and build homes, keep it off the reservation, keep it out of trust land, and sell them to all these Navajos who have a home in Flagstaff or somewhere else. And then they have collateral and they can start businesses on the reservation. So I think, or we buy Flagstaff. Those kind of creative ideas is what we need to start thinking about. And those kind of solutions. It'll accelerate the process, this chicken and the egg process. Incubate the eggs.
Well, I think something that I've been struggling with, I don't have an answer, but I'm definitely going to say it. And the lenders, people trying to lend out money, are not going to like this, but I don't have a solution. I'm just, these are just my long drives thinking, when I'm out with the sheep by myself, thinking, I think we have to define what it means to be, I think we have to define our own economy. What does that look like, and what does that mean? Are we trying to build our economy on the white people's way and what they tell us? Is it their definition? I think we need to figure out what we want. Do we want to build it off of their capitalism? Do we want to build off that capitalism, or do we want to build our own? Because capitalism became such a bad word, but we all do it. And Navajos are the best at it. We are great entrepreneurs. We've been selling this stuff since forever. So, but now I think everybody's like, oh, it's colonialism and all that. I'm a history nerd, so we can talk about using the word colonized. We're not colonized, guys, because we have our access to our own land. Other people, Mexico, all the other countries are colonized. We are not colonized. We still have our own language. So are we gonna colonize? We can definitely colonize ourselves and work with a colonized economy, or we can build our own and work it the way we want to. Why are we, and this is like going to all these programs and building a business programs and all that stuff where I'm like, I don't wanna do that. I'm not trying to become a billionaire overnight. But if Jeff Bezos wants to reach out, I'm not going to turn him down either. So, but like I'm not going to kill myself to try to get $1 billion, you know? Right now I am working enough so I can live on Navajo. That's where I want to live and that's where I'm going to be. That's where my stay is and I'm not going anywhere. But also I like to travel, you know, I like nice things and I want to go somewhere, but I see the shopping centers, I see the way the towns are built, and I'm like, yeah, reservations look like shit because we are building it like we're copying somebody else's model, and it's not even our own. That's why it looks ugly. Federal governments came in and built their buildings on there, and they said keep it, and that's not how our system works. That's not how our culture works. So we're like, as far as we're concerned, that's somebody else's building, not ours. You know, that's why it gets run down. That's why it's there. So I just want to know, are we trying to build this economy? Are we trying to be capitalist the way we see white people building it? Or is this something we're going to build on our own? Can we have our own rules? Can we have our own definition of being almost said communism. What is that word? Capitalism, yeah. I want to buy stuff. Like, I don't go into the border towns anymore to buy stuff. I get everything on Amazon. I just put in an order to pick up my food, you know? And yeah, so that's like, I don't go into border towns and go eat at Applebee's anymore. That's, so I don't know, how do we want to build your own economy? When you're thinking about how you want your life to be and how you want Delcon to look, how you want Kayenta to look, do you want it to, just like Brett was asking, like, do you want it to look like Phoenix or do you want it to look like Navajo? And, you know, what does that look like to everybody? I think is a question about why I'm here, is to ask people like, oh, what do you want for your chapter? What do you want for your people? What do you want for your producers? You know, what does that look like? And a lot of the times they're like, oh, they copy a white person's model. But that white person's model does not work for the Navajo culture. It doesn't. And that's why I think we're struggling to try to build it like that, and it doesn't work for us because we weren't built that way. And we're not taught that way either. So I don't know. That's just something that I want to get everybody's thoughts on. If you see me, I want to know what that looks like for people.
How are we on time?
Let's go another 5 minutes. Stop at the top of the hour. But go ahead. Question out there. Great input. Thank you.
Yate.
Oh, yate.
She Alan Austin da shitna. Chilchimi tore on nasha. Tohi tlin shle. She bash chin. To khane da shche. Do tore chini da shinala. So yesterday, let me share a story with you. Yesterday, I came to Twin Arrows. I work for a company out of St. Louis, Missouri. So yesterday we had a meeting, teleconference at 9 in the morning. So I had to sit in the parking lot with my computer trying to connect to that meeting. It did not work. So when we talk about infrastructure, we need better infrastructure to communicate, and this is my opinion, to communicate with the world out there, unless we want to be isolated here. So I think infrastructure is the heartbeat of any large corporation or company. That's my opinion. So I think there's a need for it. So I just wanted to kind of share that with you guys. So I think some companies might not need the infrastructure, but it would depend on what your company is. So, and that's my take on it. So,
I like that. Over here.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, over here, Jessica.
Thank you. Yate Shikesha Dinesh Kahasi. Marshall Johnson, this is Zitlichin Bagado, Quanikai. And she had an advantage, Lizathan, Dash, so Dash, Nagani, Dashinal, Habidak, Eliat. Good to see you, Derrick. And then the sponsors of this event. I want to say thank you in a big way. So, you know, you hear about these things, you wonder about how do we get caught up? How do we get ahead? For the longest, I mean, all we know is we've been in the back seat, as they say. And how do we get back to be in charge of our homeland within these 4 sacred mountains, in charge of our resources? And that's what infrastructure comes from. And I think as learning from history, I think that's where we can study how did it happen? How did we do it that we built the state of Arizona? 1930, they were out of the groundwater, subsidence, earth fissures. Their land were caving in from excessive use, overdrawing, depletion of their aquifers. But they came to Navajo. They took their raw resources, coal, the natural resource of the groundwater, to operate a mining operation, to supply a power plant that's going to supply power to push water from the Colorado River, 3,000 feet in elevation. They can replace their groundwater in Phoenix and Tucson. That operation, we did it as Navajos. We built Arizona. In 1940, there's only 400,000 people in population. Now there's close to 8 million people down there. That's all you're doing, all of you, each one of us. But the part where we have to learn from is why do our leadership continue to agree to just give our resources away? Why do we continue to let that happen? It's just a rotating door, it seems like, in what I see in Winter Rock. Same people that were there about 20 years ago, there and there again. That's the illness of this. And for what's coming out of this, I really do appreciate the Austins, Toyatlini clan, for making this event today, yesterday, and may it continue. So I just want to share this, and then the future, I think, for the state of Arizona, they might be migrating in this direction. That's the scary part to our sacred mountain. And they could easily divert Lake Upper Colorado River across the valley, just right by us, so they can supply their cities. That's the scary part of it. They're going to shackle us once they run that pipeline across into Arizona and Winter Rock right about in a few days. We're going to be a cat tribe. This is where it's headed. So, how do we defend ourselves? How to overcome and be ahead. It's not the Halati Kudo Yahadzigi Din Hain Nasalagi, Kotel Klegi, Dinal Close. The Bashin, Shin, Dark as Aja. It's what is an Aja. Nist a hallo, a nahilni, a bit senator. Aja, Bachahon, Lady Candace Yahadzigi it all. Anni Ado. Totan de Gabane Krega. I don't know. As in the other workshop next door, stress, you know. That's not bananish. Not low, but I guess. Yadla. The Kissedilson, Sean get old.
Yeah, Marshall.
Anybody else? We're Bakeha, Marshall. Great. Let's one more back there, and then we'll sum it up here, and we'll get to the next session. So great input and comments and thoughts.
Yate, my name is Levon Thomas, and I just had a few things to comment on this. I'm the owner of Bear Construction, and we do a lot of infrastructure work. But what I noticed is that you're talking, a lot of you guys are talking more about physical infrastructure, you know, water line in the ground, power line up, broadband, something physical. We also need a lot of like non-physical infrastructure. We need like in how the paperwork's gonna work. How do we get small businesses to make it easier for us to be formed on the Navajo Nation? That's all part of the infrastructure. Infrastructure for businesses to seek help, infrastructure for businesses to grow. That's all kind of what I'm looking at, and you need to develop kind of both so that you can work with the tribe and the communities kind of together. And as you develop your infrastructure, whether that is physical, in the ground, or like paperwork and administrative, it will all kind of lead to jobs, because right now it has been difficult to form a company, to work with the tribe. There's a lot of back and forth. You got to talk to this guy, you got to talk to them, and sometimes they both tell you to talk to the same person again, and there's no real knowledge, or no one really wants to take that responsibility either, because they're like, well, it's going to come back on me later on. But for me, I think you need to develop both types of infrastructure for jobs to come out. Make it easier for businesses to come out and do work. Make it easier for local businesses to work at their home sites, to work with the community, with the chapter houses, and make it so that they, the chapters can easily identify, like, oh, we have so-and-so who works on this stuff. We all know who works in our communities doing different things, and we can work together to help grow. And like in my area, we have a lot of people who are doing farming, but they mostly farm hay for animals. There's not a whole lot of farming of food, vegetables, stuff that they could sell at like farmers markets. And that's something that is also infrastructure. But I feel like when you develop all the infrastructure kind of simultaneously, jobs will start coming. You'll start getting people who are interested to come back because they see that the hurdles are starting to go down and they're more willing to come back. That's mostly what I have been kind of noticing. And yes, we do need physical infrastructure. I mean, I only got running water 10 years ago, maybe a little more. And we had electricity, but before that we had a cistern system. And And of course, everyone where I've worked with electricity and renewables, everyone's like, we see power lines going across us. How come they can't come into our homes where we have had power? We have not had power our whole lives, and yet when we were kids, this went up. How come they couldn't put a small line on the bottom to run it to us? All that stuff. So we do need physical infrastructure, and it seems like water and electricity are the main two. And then because then broadband will come in as more people start coming in. Because I noticed also broadband, and that it's more expensive to put in per mile. So the more people live together, or the more people there are in communities, the cheaper it is, and the more likely services are to be provided. But of course, it all comes back down to housing before that, so it's kind of a whole spaghetti bowl. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
A spaghetti bowl. A paschetti bowl.
Okay, one more. Go ahead, sir.
You know, just listening to Mr. Johnson there, I think one of the resources that we literally hold, one of the keys is through the tribal ranches. Big Boquillas and Wolf Springs, Navajo Nation bought millions of dollars on those tribal ranches. But yet it's leased out to non-natives, you know. I was sitting in a co-op deal yesterday. You know, I like to see all the 110 chapters form a co-op, you know, give our land a rest to where we can utilize those tribal ranches. And, you know, for instance, the last 3 years, you know, my mom was wanting me to give me her permit. And I said, and the only way that that's going to happen is, you know, we're overgrazing. My uncles, my aunts, and, you know, the 80s and the 90s, they had their time. And so now it's time, you know, we got to change our minds and be grass farmers and ranchers now. So, you know, give the land a rest. So we started our Fort Canyons Land and Cattle, LLC. We literally joined an association. We take our cattle off out of Steamboat, and we put them on tribal ranches for 5 months up out at the peaks from May to October. Then from there, we literally go to Nappy. I'm glad that Nappy opened up their pivots. So I highly advocate for every chapter to utilize that. So when I was out there, 3 years, 3 winters now, just last week we hauled cattle off of there. All I saw was Belaganas and Nalkays that were on pivots there. And I want to see more Navajo producers, chapters utilizing Nappy there. So, yeah, thank you. Leander Thomas is my name. I'm come from this community at Steamboat. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can.
I think we call it a draw. Yeah.
No, I think I won.
You think you won?
No, Derrick.
Okay. Arm wrestle.
I think just to close out, I think that the discussion went really well because it brought out one thing that we all know is that we have what we need, that we don't need the federal government, we don't need somebody from the outside to come and save us, that we have what we need, but also that we need to protect that. We need to protect our resources, we need to protect each other, we need to provide support to each other, and we need to be more creative about the way that we build this. So co-ops and thinking through, you know, providing assistance to CEOs of companies and being able to access things like water and making sure that our community members who are ranchers, are, you know, people who know how to do those things have the access to what they need, and building something that's new, something that's really about us. So I think that's really cool to have this discussion come down to those broader themes. So I appreciate everybody for your thoughts and sharing your stories with us. And Derrick and Christine, do you guys have anything you want to add?
I just want to say thank you for those of you who've shared and those of you that have stayed to listen to all of us. It's great to always hear from the people, and I think that's one thing I will say about Change Labs is we will take data, and if you haven't taken the poll, please take the poll, because we will take that information, use that information within Change Labs to see what else we can offer to help people. So take that poll if you get a chance, and thank you for coming in today.
I'll just say thank you for all your information, your stories. I agree with everybody. It's going to take all of us, to get to a place that we want to be. And that's how it was years ago, is that we continued to work together with each other. And so that's the only way we're going to be able to retain what I'll say is our great Navajo Nation. So everybody, and we'll call it in here. So thank you. Yes, infrastructure, you won. So yay!